Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yusuf Zahurla. I'm a third year at Stanford studying history, and I'm the inaugural Abbasi-Markaz Fellow. The Abbasi-Markaz Fellowship was a new initiative launched this year in collaboration with the Markaz Resource Center and the Abbasi Program in Islamic Studies. The fellowship focus is to allow a student to engage in Islamic scholarship by working with faculty and scholars from different backgrounds and curate events centered around Islam in different historical and cultural contexts. With this event, I wanted to do something that acknowledged the importance of Black History Month without going over topics that have been done many times before. Tons of Muslim organizations always do broad events on the Black Muslim experience, and that's something that's been repeated to us time and time again. With this Black Ink event, I wanted to shift gears and actually look into the work and art that is being created within the Black Muslim community. To showcase that, I am super excited today to welcome Dr. Su'ad Abdul Khabeer to join us in conversation. Dr. Abdul Khabeer is a scholar, artist, activist. She is currently a professor of American culture and Arab and Muslim American studies at the University of Michigan. She received her PhD in cultural anthropology from Princeton University and is a graduate from the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and also completed the Islamic Studies Diploma program of the Institute at Abu Nur University in Damascus. Dr. Abdul Khabeer is the author of Muslim Cool, Race, Religion, and Hip Hop in the United States, an ethnographic book. Sorry about that. An ethnographic book on the intersections of Islam, Blackness, and hip hop in redefining the meaning of race. She is also the curator of Ummi's Archive, a virtual exhibition showcasing the livelihoods of Black women, as well as the founder of Saville Square, an online forum by and for Black American Muslims dedicated to preserving the Black American Muslim experience. So inshallah, the event will go by Dr. Abdul Khabeer giving us a short 8 to 10 minute lecture on Muslim Cool. Then we'll jump into some one-on-one conversation with some questions that I have, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. The way audience Q&A will work is you can either direct message me your questions, or you can use the raise hand function and I will allow you to unmute yourself and ask the question. But without further ado, thank you, Dr. Su'ad Abdul Khabeer, for joining us, and she will now give us a quick lecture. Thank you.
Good evening. You can hear me? Great. Good evening. I begin today in the name of Allah, for the love of Muhammad, in honor of the ancestors and in celebration of my people. I also begin by acknowledging, as a descendant of stolen people on stolen land, that the land upon which we gather, where I am here in Michigan, where you are in Palo Alto, right, is the ancestral and unceded territory of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, and some of us are uninvited guests. But we can work so that these land acknowledgements turn into tangible action, so we no longer have to be. I also acknowledge, by way of the histories of colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, and resistance that brought us to this very moment, that every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala. I also begin today in deep gratitude to Yusuf Zahurla, the Abbasi Center, the Markaz, and the entire Stanford University community for inviting me to share my work today. And I extend that gratitude to everyone in the listening audience, friends and enemies. Like I heard JayZ once say, you could be anywhere in the world, but you are here with me, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to begin the lecture part with an excerpt from my book, Muslim Cool, Race, Religion, and Hip Hop in the United States. Esperanza. See, I have a camouflage scarf. I've worn it only once because this Pakistani girl walked up to me like, this is so cool. And I was like to myself, I can't even pretend like that's okay with me. And it's a girl that I love. Now, I want to back this up by saying I've been wearing camouflage my whole life. I'm the camouflage queen. I wear it a lot because I like it, but also I feel like I can. It's appropriate for me to wear it because my brother was in war. Like, geez, this is my actual surname on my jacket. Anyway, so the sister comes up just really sincerely. I really like your scarf. Where can I get it from? And I was kind of like, thank you. But I don't really know what else to say. It's a compliment, But in another way, it's really a thievery because we don't have much, right? Like, where does culture come from? It comes from people who don't have much. That's where hip hop comes from. That's where house music came from. That's where tying your hair up in a scarf, wearing fatigues because you ain't got no other clothes, right? You going home to silverware that's really silver, but you taking my scarf? Just let me have something. And I get it. You can't really tell people what they can put on their body. I get that. But there is a certain level you can at least give due to where it's done and at least try to do it authentically yourself. You have to know your boundaries and give knowledge and respect. So at the time of this interview, and this is a quote from Esperanza, Esperanza was a single mother in her early 30s. She is a Latina multimedia artist who loves to teach, but also teaches to pay the bills. I met her with Esperanza at her home in Humboldt Park in Chicago. And after she let her kids know we handle an important business here, we lounged and she shared her reflections on being race, gendered, class, and Muslim. Although Esperanza is a convert to Islam and was born and raised in Chicago, and I was born to Muslim parents and raised in Brooklyn, we hit it off right away. This was because of the other things we had in common: Latinidad, being part of the hip hop generation, and having intimate knowledge of the joys and frustrations of growing up working class in the hood. I had seen Esperanza at hip hop cultural events around the city before we formally met at the Inner City Muslim Action Network, IMAN. IMAN is a Muslim-run nonprofit that provides services, community organizing, and art-space activism on the southwest side of Chicago. IMAN was a key site for my research, just as it was a central place of importance for many of my interlocutors, who I refer to as my teachers, because I drew on their generous sharing of their knowledge and experiences over my 10 years of research on Muslim cool. My teachers are Black, Latine, Arab, and South Asian US American Muslims engaged in hip hop based activism. And I should note that you'll hear me use the term US American as opposed to American, in acknowledgement of the fact that the United States is not the only country in the Americas. So my teachers, these US American Muslims engaged in hip hop based activism, are the progenitors of a discourse, an epistemology, meaning ways of thinking and exchanging ideas, an aesthetic, forms of style, and an embodiment, ways of being in the world that I call Muslim cool. Forged at the intersection of Islam and hip hop, Muslim cool is a way of being Muslim that draws on Blackness to contest anti-Blackness, as it shows up in the religious and cultural hegemonies of Arab and South Asian US American Muslim communities on the one hand, and then the hegemonies of whiteness on the other. So Esperanza wore camouflage because she liked it, but also because racialized systemic inequalities had shut her family out of economic opportunity and showed her brother into the service. In contrast, the quote unquote Pakistani girl who thought camouflage was cool had access to a set of class-based and cultural privileges. She was educated, she lived in the suburbs, and she had more cultural authenticity as a Muslim. Accordingly, the Pakistani girl's potential appropriation of camouflage was embedded in unequal power relations. Esperanza loved the girl, and the girl loved her scarf. But as Esperanza put it, all that love was fraught, quote, no matter how much Islam we had in common, unquote. Yet the camouflage-loving Pakistani girl was not merely a cultural third wheel. She was also a racialized and gendered Muslim subject navigating her identity at the crossroads of hip hop and Islam. The Pakistani girl in Esperanza's story reminded me of Rabia, a young Pakistani US American woman who was one of my key teachers in the field. I could imagine Rabia admiring Esperanza's scarf with the same kind of unbridled enthusiasm. But in contrast to the first quote unquote Pakistani girl, Rabia was an activist who worked in Inglewood, a predominantly Black neighborhood in Chicago. For Esperanza, Rabia was different because the struggle was not just a fashion accessory for her. However, Esperanza noted insightfully that this did not mean that Rabia, she, or any of us could escape the complex realities of race, identity, and power in the fight to contest hegemonies and overcome inequality. This insight is critical to understanding Muslim cool because at the meeting of Islam and hip hop, the ways Muslimness and Blackness come together both challenge and reconstitute the racial order of the United States. So with Muslim cool, I make three basic arguments. The first is that Blackness is central to US American Islam. This means that Blackness shapes the individual experiences of Muslims in the United States, Black and non-Black. It shapes inter-ethnic Muslim relationships, like in the case of Esperanza and the Pakistani girl. And it also shapes the terms on how US Muslims deal with the state. The second argument I make with Muslim cool is that race and Blackness continue to be significant in the contemporary US, and I identify the ways in which race, and specifically Blackness, is marshaled in the work of anti-racism. All of this means Muslim cool is complex. There's a push and a pull at its core that is grounded in hip hop as a site of critical contradiction and contestation. The contradictions and contestations of hip hop are often depicted through the homonyms, roots and roots. And now, depending where you're from, you might say roots and routes, right? But I'm from New York, we say roots and roots, R-O-O-T-S and R-O-U-T-E-S. So hip hop is rooted in the Afro-diasporic expressive cultures, and it has traveled on roots far beyond those origins. To the pair of roots and roots, I add the loop. I take loop from the hip hop sampling technique. Whereas roots and roots extend and splinter into multiple pathways, the loop extends and returns, not in a closure, but in a cipher. The communal and competitive space in which hip hop culture regenerates itself and develops. The loop is a metaphor for the linkages between Islam, hip hop, and Blackness in the 21st century that create Muslim cool. Black Islam, from Malcolm X samples over breakbeats in the 1980s to A Tribe Called Quest at the Grammys in 2017, gave hip hop knowledge of self, which in turn helps young 21st century Black and non-Black US Muslims return to Blackness and Islam as a way to discover their own knowledge of self, Muslim cool. Yet all this is complicated by my third argument. Any analysis of contemporary Blackness must contend both with the ways in which it is used to resist white supremacy and can be complicit with white supremacy. When young Muslims, Black and non-Black, engage Blackness as a form of resistance, they risk reproducing long-standing discourses that both devalue Blackness. And so we see this in Muslim community spaces sometimes when, you know, the things that Black Muslims and their experiences and their cultural norms and the way in which they express their Islam is always and already un-Islamic or suspect religiously. So we see people can risk reproducing this devaluation of Blackness, and they can risk co-opting Blackness, right? And we see this in the ways in which, you know, there'll be, you know, there was that artist Mona Haydar who came out a couple of years back, and you know, she came out as a like a rapper, and all of the mainstream media was like, oh, this is the first Muslim woman rapping, and it's, you know, it's completely false, right? But there's this co-optation of Blackness in this Black form that then becomes a way in which, right, Islam becomes cool, for example, but Black people are a race. So that's a form of co-optation. So when young Muslims, Black and non-Black, engage Blackness, right, as a form of resistance, they risk reproducing the devaluation of Blackness and this co-optation. But they are also at the intersection of anti-Black racism and anti-Muslim racism. And so they face the risk of state violence. Yet the future of Muslim cool and Muslims in the United States more broadly lies in its investment in resistance. The ability to imagine, articulate, and participate in alternate choices for resistance and political vision. This is a prospect that comes at high risk, but to riff off Asada Shakur and Kendrick Lamar, we have nothing to lose but our chains. We gonna be all right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Khabeer. That was an excellent lecture. You know, you hit on a lot of different points that I was hoping we would get the chance to discuss. You know, actually one thing that you brought to mind, Iman, I'm from Rockford, Illinois, so I've been to a couple of Iman events in the Chicago area. I have some really good family friends back home who have been very involved in that community as well. And definitely something that I'm glad I was exposed to when I was younger to sort of understand what this type of work looks like. Okay, so wonderful. With that, I want to jump into a couple questions that I had, and then we'll jump into the audience Q&A. The first question I had is actually on the cover art for your book and sort of the influence behind that. So I am familiar with the painting Girl with a Pearl Earring by Johann Vermeer. And so could you tell us a little bit about the influence behind, replacing that with, a Black woman and what that means?
Right. So I actually came across that image somewhere online before I wrote the book. And it's a photograph by this Ethiopian US American artist, Awola Rizku, who is based out in LA. And when I first saw the image, I wasn't thinking about my book. I wasn't thinking about anything like that. But he titled the image "The Girl with the Bamboo Earring." And people who know hip hop, right? Like there's a famous verse from a classic song by LL Cool J. I want a girl with extensions in her hair, bamboo earrings, at least 2 pair, right? So bamboo earrings, like they're gold hoops, and the hoop is in the texture looks like bamboo, right? Or this like iconic hip hop kind of symbol, right? And they're also, and therefore also an iconic symbol of Blackness, of sort of Black life in cities, Black culture, Black cool, all that kind of stuff, right? And the Vermeer painting is this classical European, right, piece of work that has embedded in all these ideas about whiteness and beauty and all that kind of stuff. So sort of to kind of turn that on his head with this Black woman who I actually think is like his sister, right? To me was really powerful. Now her hair is covered. Now you don't know, right? She's not necessarily Muslim because her hair is covered, but her hair is also covered. So the image really struck me as, striking and beautiful, and, also making a really bold statement about who is beautiful and what that looks like, right? And what is valuable. So when I was looking for a cover for my book, it occurred to me that this might encapsulate a lot, right? Because it's challenging, like I say, Muslim cool is, sort of using Blackness to challenge anti-Blackness, right? Which is what this image is doing. Muslim cool is speaking to this loop between Blackness, Islam, and hip hop. And this woman, because her headscarf and the way she's dressed could be interpreted as a Muslim woman, is doing similar things because she has the bamboo earring, she's Black, and she has on, she's covering her hair and she's modestly dressed. So even though initially I was a little bit hesitant because the image is really clean, and I was like, hip hop has some grime and grit to it. So but then a good friend of mine, Leslie Hewitt, who's a professor at Cooper Union, she's an artist, and she was like, no, you should definitely do this because it also gives people different ways to enter the text. And I always joke, and it's not so much of a joke, but it's like the best decision I made about this book was that cover, because I know people who have bought the book just because they love the cover, and it's on their shelf, So.
No, that's really beautiful, because like when I had first seen the cover of the book, I'm almost like, again, European and white centric standards of beauty, but I had recognized the Vermeer painting, but then you're brought into it because it's this huge contrast from it and what you're normally accustomed to. So I really appreciate sort of that meaning behind it. The next question I had was sort of more about the content of the book and some of the things that you had touched on in your lecture, but about Muslim cool, and you discussed how it's about this intersection of Blackness and Islam and in US America, and how different young Muslims, whether Black or non-Black, are interacting with this phenomena. So I guess my question is, what does it mean to be or see Muslim cool, and what does that entail? And I guess, to give some context from my own, I am very incredibly cognizant of the way in which South Asian young Muslims very often co-opt Black culture, whether it's hip hop or even these days with hairstyles and this and that. And so how does it actually manifest?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. The thing about Muslim cool, and the thing about, well, culture, pop culture specifically, and pop culture in general, and Black pop culture specifically, is this place, like I say, of contestation and contradiction. Black people of African descent, when they were first brought to the Americas, were brought as commodities, right? They were not brought as people. And since that first kind of commodification, objectification, right, the kinds of things that Black people produce are also commodities, right? And people kind of pick them up and use them as they wish, right? So this is a long-standing sort of issue and problem, and something that's problematic. So it's not surprising, or it's almost expected that you're going to see other groups of people do the same type of thing. What makes Muslim cool, and this is what I was trying to illustrate between the sort of Pakistani girl and Rabia, right? The difference is that, yes, both, for example, Muslim cool is about style and aesthetic, right? So the Pakistani girl sees the camouflage jacket, that's cool, I want to rock that. Rabia sees it, that's cool, I want to rock that. But Rabia goes a step further. Rabia is in real life relationship with Black people, right? And that's meaningful, and not like I have a Black friend, type of thing, right? But like she's in, this real meaningful relationship. She's dedicating time and energy of her own life, right, in support of, in alliance with, as an accomplice to, right, Black people who are trying to sort of create, better futures for themselves, right? So she's in line with that. Now that doesn't mean that she completely escapes, and I like to call it the ghost of minstrelsy's past, right? Because that's the history. So we can't escape the history. What we do is we sort of mediate it, right? There was another young woman who was one of my teachers. I called her in the book Fatima. She talked about headscarf styles, and that she really wanted to wear a headscarf style, maybe not similar to this one, but like sort of tied in a bun. And she thought it was really cool. She was like, it reminds me of Erykah Badu, and I can put my earrings out, and that's really cool. But she was like, but I know it has cultural significance. I know that this is something that comes out of Black communities, and I'm not Black. So she said, before I wanted to do it, but I didn't do it right away. I kind of waited. She volunteered at Iman. She was doing other stuff. And then as she got more sort of integrated or built sort of deeper relationships with the communities from which this style came from, then she would begin to do that, right? And it doesn't mean that somebody might see her and look at her crazy, right? Because again, you can't say the history, but there was a real intentionality and a real care and thoughtfulness to how she was acting, as opposed to people like Eddie Mann, for example, in a different, I don't write about this in Muslim Cool, but in a different article, I talk about how there were folks who would come in, for a day and volunteer and be out, that type of thing, right? So Iman and Black people became more of this kind of space of charity and doing good works, and not sort of this idea of solidarity, right? And being together in struggle. So for me, so Muslim Cool is the style, right? It is the way you move, it's the embodiment, but it's also these relationships that people are building to try to mitigate and mediate the histories that we've inherited.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For non-Black Muslims who are interacting with Muslim Cool, there needs to be substance behind appreciating the aesthetic. There needs to be that added intention. And that reminds me of, I had an interesting experience growing up where I went to a predominantly Black high school. And so I was surrounded by Black peers growing up. And then when I came to Stanford, which is of course a PWI, I noticed this incredible shift in how people discussed race and discuss racial issues. And I noticed that people in spaces like these often talk about, these types of things and these issues and about Black people, but they are never really in conversation with Black people. And what does that mean in terms of how we conceptualize these different things? So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. To jump more into sort of Muslim Cool and specifically you talked a lot about hip hop, something that I'm a huge fan of. I like your shout outs to Tribe Called Quest and Kendrick and Asada Shakur and whatnot. But in regards to hip hop, there's a long history to it and it goes back decades. So how has hip hop been that musical avenue for Black Muslims to define this cultural space? Like, are there
Yeah,
the, leaders of this type of industry? Yeah.
right. So the way that I think about, and I talk about like the idea of the loop of Muslim schools. So if you look at hip hop's history, in sort of Afro-diasporic Black communities in the South Bronx, you'll find that people talk about, well, actually, let me, before I say that, hip hop, people who are into hip hop heads, hip hop is made of elements. And the fifth element is called knowledge, right? Which comes from knowledge of self. The fifth element comes into hip hop because of the ways in which Black Islam, Black Muslim communities, the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, Sunni Black Muslim communities, right? The way in which they impacted Black communities more broadly. The messages of Black pride, the messages of Black empowerment, the messages of, right, sort of self-determination, those messages, they really had a deep impact on Black communities. And so when you look at hip hop's history, right, the people who are sort of the kind of first generation of hip hop creators will talk very explicitly about hearing, for example, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad say something about, standing up as Black people, and that having this profound effect on how they were running their lives, right? And so part of then knowledge, and so knowledge of self is this concept, that's this idea that really comes directly from, in terms of hip hop, directly from Elijah Muhammad, this idea of you have to know your past so you can understand your present, or so you can work for a better future, right? You have to have that. You have to have this knowledge of self. And so, in hip hop communities, there's lots of pedagogy and knowledge. Like, it's like you have to learn things. Like, when you really, like, when you get into hip hop beyond what you hear, like on whatever, I guess people don't listen to the radio anymore, but like wherever you kind of get kind of mainstream music, like when you get past that level and you really get into it, one of the things you're always going to see is people begin to like study, because if people reference stuff and like, what is that about? What are you talking about here? What is this kind of thing? And so this idea of knowledge, and even in like some of the most kind of irreverent hip hop music, to use that term, you still find this questions, these ideas about who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? So you have this kind of broader impact around just kind of knowledge of self. And then you have the very specific impact of the idea that in order to have knowledge of self, I need to be Muslim, or I need to be a 5%er, or I need to be in the nation, because I need to learn this history, right? And so particularly in what they call the golden age of hip hop, you'll find all the time, like these references, right? From before the golden age is like late 80s, early 90s, but even before then, you'll have, what do you call it? Like the first things we've seen these break beats, right? There's a song Malcolm X Don't Sell Out by this like German artist, where these break beats and it's like Malcolm X speeches on top of it, right? Then you'll have groups like Poor Righteous Teachers, right? And they have, all the different songs. I mean, even their name, Poor Righteous Teachers, comes from 5%. Belief. Then, they'll have like Assalamu alaikum assalam, people talk about not eating ham, all this kind of stuff will be replete in the music. And then as we move forward in time, we'll find people just making references that don't necessarily invoke the religion in a very explicit way, but do invoke a knowledge of Islam through Black Muslims. So someone like Biggie talks about Ramadan in the song or something like that. Or like Nicki Minaj had a mixtape when she first came out, and it was like, I don't F with pigs, like Assalamu alaikum, right? Pigs is the police, Assalamu alaikum is for Muslims. Muslims don't like the police. I mean, it's like this whole thing that's happening in that statement. And even one of the more recent, then we see like Kendrick Lamar and like, in his video it was on his second album, I forget the name of the song, but he uses the imagery of Gordon Parks' pictures of the Nation of Islam in the 60s. Or Run with the Mob. Who did that song? I'm forgetting his name, but I forget his artist's name. It's Ace. I'm forgetting his name, but anyway.
ASAP Ferg.
Right, it's ASAP Ferg, right? So he has a song wrong with the mob, and they're using Alhamdulillah, and like people are tripping, but like he's actually using Alhamdulillah correctly. So like, I mean, it's like the word fits in the English syntax because he's using it right, which demonstrates a clear cut knowledge. So so we see this happening. So we see that influence, and then of course, there are the influence, and then there are people who are of African descent, Black people, and who are FCs, right? So from anybody from Rakim to like Yasin Bey to Maimouna Youssef to Q-Tip to I mean, like it just goes on and on and on in terms of that, as well as people outside of just emceeing. So like De La, or it should not even, it's not even De La I'm talking about. I think it's DJ Scratch is Muslim, and like from DJing, and then there's a group. These two, there's like Master Fable, right, who's the original member of the Rocksteady crew. He's not Black, he's Puerto Rican, but he's Muslim. And like, there's a group, these two young women, they're new, they're like probably a little bit older than you, right? El Time, they're the twins, and they're B girls. So I mean, so there's like, and then obviously there's the people as well who are doing the music.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I really like how you brought up that there are big name artists, people who are in the huge American pop culture who are recognizable names and are utilizing these things, and people who are very big into it. Like I remember even Jay Electronica's recent album, like JayZ is on that album like a ton, and JayZ is arguably the biggest name in all of hip hop, right? And so what does that mean for that intersection?
Well, JayZ used to be Ansar too. So, and Ansar was this kind of they kind of evolved out of Islam, but they were this kind of small Muslim community in Brooklyn that there's a history to the Ansar, but he used to be Ansar. Of course, Jay Electronica is in the Nation, and so so these relationships, and even like we'll see that all the time. And and he's from, and JC's from Brooklyn, so it's a whole.
It's all there. It's all there.
It's in the water, so.
For sure. Excellent. Thank you. I next wanted to jump into like a broader question on art. So we've talked a lot about how hip hop is this defining fundamental method as to which Blackness and Islam and culture interact. But my question is, how do other avenues such as film, fashion, performance, I know you do performance and spoken word, and even things like food sort of also, add to this idea of Muslim cool?
So, so I think that's an interesting question. I mean, when I talk about food and Muslim cool, I talk about the ways in which hip hop, the ways in which hip hop music and questions of health, right, kind of come through, and eating healthy, and like Karis, when you said the song about not eating beef, and that being drawn from Black Muslim sort of thoughts and thinking around food and around and again, like a lot Honorable Elijah Muhammad is How to Eat to Live, right? So this idea of like what you put into your body, and then connecting that to the kind of concept of tayyib, right? So Muslims do this thing where you eat halal meat, which means it's permissible. But tayyib is it's like this another level, right? In terms of the quality of what you're eating. And so I think about it in those ways, right? In terms of, again, knowledge of self, and the ways in which people's practices are shaped by what they're doing and how they're doing, basically how practice is shaped. So not just kind of what I'm thinking, but also someone else is on my screen right now. Is everything?
I'm not seeing that. I think things might be okay. I can take a look.
Yeah, I just didn't know if it was an issue for the recording. I think Black Islam. I think I also think of in terms of these terms. So Muslim cool is this embodiment, this epistemology, this discourse, right? That's really shaped by Black Islam and by Black Muslim contributions. And so when I think about Black Muslims and food, I think about the bean pie. And I make this claim, and I will die on this hill, right? But that the bean pie is the only Muslim food in existence. Because all the other places where Muslims come from in the world, whatever they eat, people who aren't Muslim eat that too. The food comes out of just kind of their environment, broadly speaking. It doesn't have a necessarily religious connotation. Bean pie, however, explicitly comes from a Muslim experience. And so bean pie, and if you haven't had a bean pie, you need to have a bean pie, but you got to be careful where you go to get one, make sure it's legit. But like that kind of thing, you'll see bean pie showing up in different places, right? I think in terms of television and film, you'll see this influence. I was just talking about this at another talk I gave this month. There's that show Blackish, and there was an episode of Blackish that I saw where the topic of the show was whether or not the topic of the show was about a cousin that I think the father in the show had, who was incarcerated and was about to be released, and whether or not the family would accept them in the home. This was kind of the debate or conversation they were having. But in the very last scene of the episode, they're going to meet the cousin at a diner. And so they're beginning to think out what to order, and they pause to consider whether or not the cousin eats pork, right? And, for those who know, like that's an immediate, right? They're immediately indexing this history in which, prisons, which we need to abolish, prisons, are places where people become Muslim, where people sort of, in an effort to survive in an inhumane environment, hold on to, retain, and even expand their humanity, right? And do that by becoming Muslim. So they're sort of basically referencing that, and it's like literally, it was like the last 10 seconds or something of the show, right? You'll see that kind of thing, and that indicates, right, this impact and what that means. In many ways, there are other examples you can talk about, and sometimes the examples can be problematic, right? So there was like that show American Crime, where Regina King played this Black Muslim woman, and it was okay, but it was also confusing just because they sort of all these different types of, like, it's like she was the kind of religious space that she was in seemed to resemble like a Nation of Islam community, but the way she dressed didn't, for example, things like that, right? Or this idea that Muslims are only people who are protesting, as opposed to having broader things. But then, of course, when you have Muslim created media, you have different things. So like, for example, that film Jinn that came out by Naja Mutman, and she's from the Bay. There's also that show that I saw. It's like, I think you can watch it on Instagram. It was called Issa La Brea. And they had two characters. The two main characters were they're like millennials, a young Black woman, a young South Asian, East American woman, and their friends. And they really depict, right, their lives. And then apparently, and I haven't seen it yet, but apparently on Abbott Elementary, in a recent episode, one of the little kids is a little Muslim girl. And all of the Black Muslim I know who are on Twitter, they're like, yo, she was great. Like, it was like it was legit. Like, and Abbott Elementary is like set, I think, in Baltimore, right? Which has a history, and it's not far from Philly. So like, there's a sense, and the creator of that show is not a Muslim, but she is Black. You know what I mean? So I think we see these representations kind of come in a range. So yeah, I feel like I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Oh, absolutely. And 100%. About the bean pie, that was also especially really interesting because we don't think about it like that, right? Like South Asian, growing up, sure, biryani, but biryani is not a Muslim food, right? Biryani is a South Asian food. There's nothing that's, so that makes a lot of sense. In the interest of time, I want to sort of combine the last couple of questions I have just to give space to the audience as well. So Dr. Abdul Khabeer, you have a couple of other projects, Saville Square and Umi's Archive, and both sort of discuss or interact with preservation of Black American Muslims. And Saville Square is specifically like an online forum, and Umi's Archive is an online exhibition. There's, documents and archives. I think, do you want me to sort of go ahead and start that screen share?
Yeah,
and we can
sure.
run through some of the things. And then by all means, please, let us know what these are. So this is Preserving the Legacy, but of course I'll let you explain.
Right. So Saville Square is an education and media collective. And what we do is we, write about, we think deeply, right? We invite people to learn from and think deeply with Black Muslims, sort of in the US, but broadly speaking. And what you see on the screen right now is a latest project we have. So Saville Square isn't just about preservation, right? We do things that are contemporary as well. But this is a project that our special special project lead, Aida Abdul Rashid, has created. And actually, that's a picture of my mother, Alayhma. And what it is a series of, if you scroll down, right? So it's this series of portraits. So what happened was Aida worked with these photographers, Raj and B. Walker, and to take these portraits of Black Muslim, just Black Muslim people, just a range of people, right? And so the portraits were taken in Atlanta, they were taken in New York, they were taken in the Bay Area, and they were taken in LA. And so what happens is you'll have an image and then the audio, a person talking, sort of a reflection. And so part of the goal of something like this, is like it says, if you scroll back up or down, up, yeah, up, yeah. No, the other way. Sorry. Keep going. Oh no, I actually didn't say what I thought I would say. Anyway, but the point is that, like, Muslims of African descent, Black Muslims, have a very rich and deep history in the Americas and the world. But unfortunately, if you were to rely on mainstream media, whether that's a white mainstream media or whether that's a Muslim mainstream media, you would never see it. And so part of what we do at Saville Square is first we work out of a space of self-love. So we love ourselves, we support ourselves, we do for self, and we have stories, right, that are important to tell. And like the first thing we have a podcast on the square, and our most recent episode of On the Square came out a couple of weeks ago, and it was called Being Black and Muslim in the World. And I was the host for the episode, and I talked to a Black Muslim woman from Canada, a Black Muslim man from the UK, and a Black Muslim man from South Africa. And people should definitely check out the episode because it's really compelling, both in the ways in which the Black Muslimness as a kind of a global experience, that it has both its challenges, but also its promise. So these are the kind of things that we do at Saville Square. If you want to go to, I guess, Umi's archive? Maybe?
Yeah, we can jump to there. And I have exhibition 4 brought up.
Okay, that's perfect.
This or go to the home screen, up to you.
No, this is fine.
Okay.
So Umi's archive is a multimedia interdisciplinary research project that I'm embarking on right now. Umi, for those who don't know, is an Arabic term, but in Black Arabic, which is what I call it, how Black Muslims use Arabic language, Ummi is sort of the equivalent of, Ummi means my mother, technically in Arabic, but the way Black Muslims use it, it means mommy, right? Ummi, because I call my mother Ummi. So Ummi, my Ummi was, she was born Audrey Weeks on April 4th, 1950 in Harlem, New York, and she passed away as Amina Amatul Haq in October 2nd, 2017 in Queens, New York. And she lived a really remarkable life, but it wasn't singular. She was, like I said, born in Harlem, raised in Queens. She was the granddaughter of Caribbean immigrants. She was a Black Panther. She was a dancer. She was a single mother. She was a public school teacher. She was like this community activist. And so in her personal archive and in her family archive are all these items that are really, really rich and significant in how they help to tell the stories of who Black people are, right? And so this exhibition was the exhibition called Weusi Tutashinda Bila Shaka, which is Swahili for Black people we will succeed without doubt. And let's see, if we go back, so if
to the home page.
No.
Okay.
So we can say here, but I was thinking of, so actually let me finish and then I'll point out something. So from April to October of last year, I did a 6-part online exhibition. So there were 6 different exhibitions in which I shared items where I gave explanations as well as interpretations of their significance. The items were everything from like my grandfather's photos from World War II, where he was in Iran and he was in India and Pakistan, to cassette recordings of Black Muslim women learning how to pray in Arabic in the 1970s, right? A real wide range of items. And so there were 6 exhibitions. So now when you go to umisarchive.com, you don't see all 6 exhibitions because I'm doing some work on their functionality, but you get snapshots. And so this is a snapshot exhibition and so it talks about Black girlhood, for example, and this is the cover of a diary that I found of my mother's from when she was like 13. Like, I think it starts in 1962 and the last entry is 1967. And what's really significant about that is that, when we think about Black girls, Black children in general are often denied childhoods even today, right? Black children are treated as if they're adults, right? They're criminalized. And there isn't we don't actually get a lot of firsthand narratives from Black children and definitely not Black girls. So it's really exciting to find this diary where she's talking about like her crushes. She's talking about, dealing with school, things like that. And the next image there is from her junior high school, because she integrated her junior high school. And, we think about integration and we think about it vis-a-vis the South, right? Like that's what happened. But she was in the first class that had Black students at this junior high school in New York City, Louis Pasteur. And another item that's not on this page, but that's in the archive is like her, we used to do this thing, I think they've probably stopped it now, where you would have autograph books. So you have this book and people who are your classmates would sign the book, and, as whatever. So when you look at the autograph book, there's one person who's like, giving this message of like, hey, like congratulations, whatever. And then there's like someone who wrote over that person, right? Who's like, you better change your ideas about Negroes, right? About Black people, right? Which speaks to what's happening at this school. Or like there's another image from her high school, which was also predominantly white, where this guy, I think his name was like Dwight or something, this white guy, student at her school, his picture is in the Oriental Club. Now, of course, we don't use Oriental because that's wrong, but that's what they were using at the time. So the Oriental Club was basically the Asian American Students Club at the school. He was not Asian American, but he's in the photo, right? And his note in the yearbook is doubly sort of, it's like white fragility in 1968, because first he's like, oh, I'm sorry that I mess up your book. And what is he referring to? Well, he initially wrote a message to somebody else in the book, right? So that's the first thing. Then he's like to her, he's like, I think you'll find that you will you'll get more bees with honey than vinegar, something like that, right? So, why is he telling her that, right? On another page in her yearbook, there's someone saying, my Black sister and the way she dances, it makes you think, right? So I mean, so clearly, like what is happening when Black people in New York City, not in Jackson, Mississippi, right, are integrating these schools. So those are some of the things. And then the other items here talk about Black arts. She was an artist. She was she helped to kind of initiate West African dance in the Midwest in Ohio. This is a scene she played the role Felicity in Jean Genet's The Blacks. And then it kind of goes on and on. And so the items are, each item has like a story, right? But the full story or the full thing that I'm sort of interested in, I think, and actually, can you go one other thing and then we'll stop. We can ask questions to the audience, but can you go back to the homepage?
Homepage for sure. So exhibition home.
And can you go to Amatala exhibition? Yep. Yeah.
Snapshot. Let's see. It's a little laggy, but hopefully.
Yes, I know. Something's happened. So anyway, so this is another exhibition, right? When this is one's focusing more on when she first became Muslim in the 70s. And these people are like, they're Muslim women on a mission. And they're like, and because they came, she was a Panther, she's kind of African, so they're trying to build nation, they're trying to build new worlds, right? And Islam becomes a way to do that. And in terms of Muslim cool, and maybe that's what I was thinking back from before when we talked, Yusuf, but in terms of Muslim cool, like this is an origin point, right? And if you look at, like, not here, but in the full exhibition, there's an item that is it's like notes for an event that they were planning. Because my mother and her friends, they had organizations for days. Like they were always creating organizations, they were always organized something, doing something. So it was notes for an event they were planning. And on the side, they were scribbling in terms of the kinds of resources they were going to draw on. And one of the resources that was going to be drawn on was The Last Poets. And The Last Poets, right, is a music ensemble, a poetry music ensemble that started in '68, and people consider them like the fathers of hip hop, right? Because of what they were doing, because of the politics of their music, because of how they rhymed and what they did, right? And so you have these young Black Muslim women in the late '70s organizing events and bringing the Last Poets in. Like this is an origin point. This is kind of where the histories of something like Muslim cool kind of start from. So just broadly speaking, and I'll end here, the goal of Umi's archive is to sort of create possibilities. Like what I say is like, it's a reclaimed space where we remember and dream. And so my goal is to create a space that we can remember and learn about histories that we don't know. And the point of doing that is so that we can learn from them and imagine what we want for our future. And that's central to this process of learning and imagination are Black women and everyday Black women. And that everyday Black women are people who know things we all need to know, right? And so this is where, this is kind of like the thing that undergirds the whole project.
With that, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I know I'd love to keep the conversation going, but Dr. Abdul Khabeer is in Michigan. She's 3 hours ahead of us California folk right now. So I want to be mindful for time. Before I close, Dr. Abdul Khabeer, I wanted to give you a chance to take some space and talk about different projects you have going on, different links. I know we talked about where people should go and buy your book, and if you want to sort of talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if people are interested in getting the book, I have on drsuad.com, which is my website. I have a link where you can get it. So just don't go to Amazon. You can go anyplace else to get the book if you're interested in that book. Also, you can sign up to get updates on Umi's archive. So if you go to umisarchive.com, the first time you go there, you'll get to sign up because we're going to be launching, inshallah, we'll be launching the full exhibitions again with more functionality, better attention to accessibility in the summer. So you can see that and what's coming, get some updates on that. Also, obviously, Saville Square, you can also follow, you can donate. Actually, there's a link, and let me try to put this in the chat, because speaking of like Blackness.
I think I can grab it real quick, just so you don't have to. Let me see.
Oh, I'm already here. It's cool.
Okay, for sure.
But we have this great sweatshirt, since it's still sweatshirt weather, that actually is recreated. It was inspired by a poem that I wrote called Hajar Black Girl Magic. And so the sweatshirt says Hajar Black Girl Magic since the time of Abraham. And so if you want to make a statement, that's a statement to be made as well. And the proceeds support Saville Square. So yeah, so I think you can follow, like I said, and if you're interested too, you can follow me on social media. I'm mostly a Twitter person. Although I do have an Instagram, and I actually just posted something there today that's kind of fun. But yeah, so those are the ways to keep in touch.
Beautiful. Well, with that, thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Khabeer. I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to our community. Like I said at the beginning, the purpose of these events are to sort of spark this dialogue and spark this discourse and bring this conversation to my Stanford community, but abroad. And so I just want to thank you, and I'm sure everyone else here enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Khabeer, and thank you everyone for coming.
Have a good night. Oh, afternoon, evening. I know what I'm talking about.
For sure. All right. Thank you all.
All right.